Connecting with friends outside of the church does not always come naturally. Ministry leaders who do connect with their communities, however, realize the blessing of making friends before they need them. Welcome to Ministry in Motion. We will talk about this and more next. Orlan, welcome to Ministry in Motion. I'm so glad to have you, man.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I should say Dr. Orlan Johnson.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Orlan, you serve as the PARL Director for the North American Division, and you are a lawyer. Mm-hmm. There is a JD behind your name.
That's true.
What does PARL stand for, P-A-R-L?
PARL actually stands for Public Affairs and Religious Liberty. There are lots of times that people only focus on the religious liberty part of the job that we do. But to be honest, the PA side of the business, which I like to call it, the public affairs side, actually makes the religious liberty side easier. Public affairs lets them know who we are and what we believe, but then the religious liberty side of the business makes sure to hold them accountable.
Tell me a little bit more about public affairs.
Public affairs, I believe, is the opportunity to go out and let a community know who you are based on how you define yourself. Lots of times when you're not out in a community, they have to guess and they start speculating and they start sometimes making up things. But if I can get out in the community and tell them who I am and what I do, then they no longer have to guess. And I can help to shape my message a whole lot better than allowing somebody else to shape it for me.
You know, that's real interesting. That's an excellent segue into our topic, making friends before you need them. It may sound a little selfish, but in reality, as Jesus has asked us to be the salt and the light of the world, we can't be salt and light without being friends.
Absolutely.
And so tell me why that's important. You know, a pastor may be watching, a local church ministry leader may be listening. From the set, why is it important making friends?
Well, I think one thing is at some point in life, you're going to need a friend and you're going to probably need some help at some point in time. And I think the worst time to have to ask somebody for a favor is if you've never met them before.
Yes.
And I think it's so important to get out into your community, establish relationships, bring something to the table first. Bring something so that someone else can take a look at it and say, that's really helpful. And then maybe down the road, you may need that person to come back and assist you in some way. Yes. But I like the idea of just going out, making contact with my community, having my community know me as simply being one of the friends in the community.
Oh, that's such a blessing. Before you ask them for something or need something, it's a whole lot better to have been friends prior.
Oh, yeah. When you're running a church, sometimes you need to get permits. Sometimes you need to, be able to park differently, especially if you're in an urban community. And if people know you as a good friend to the community, they in turn can come out and help you to support you in the things that you would like to do.
You know, I'm sitting here kind of scratching my head because you would think that that's a natural understanding. But in some ways, we don't do the best job as a Christian community, as a church of believers in connecting. Maybe it's because we have maybe the truth and we have to tell the world about the truth. But as we build relationships and as people listen to us, I had a friend whose name will remain anonymous.
Okay.
He's a lawyer.
Okay.
Who told me a story about a Jewish family and a German family prior to World War II, before Nazis came into power, that this German family and this Jewish family were friends. And when the war broke out, guess what? The German family hid the Jewish family. And so they were friends prior to the war, during the war, and of course they survived the war because they made friends before the war.
Wow.
And that was a powerful story that kind of rivets home the title of our broadcast today. And so as we think about that, Orlan, you professionally and personally have practiced what you're preaching
Yep.
now.
Yep.
What are some of the professional benefits you've received from this whole thing of building relationships, networking, and making friends?
Well, you know, I had a mentor that told me one time, he was actually doing a big fundraiser for a presidential candidate. And at the time, I was a law school student. And I said to him, I said, well, Reg, it's easy for you to do this. You are well known, you have a lot of money. A guy like me who has nothing, I mean, I can't get involved in this. And he told me that's absolutely incorrect. He said, the difference between you and me is I may be able to pay money to get into the game later, but you have to pick a horse early on the cheap and ride it all the way to the end. And what I ended up finding out is that when you meet a lot of people, you have no idea where they're going to be in the future. And even today, there's some political leaders that I know and have known for probably 30, 40 years. I went to law school with them. I met them at events. I kept in contact with them, and they one day were a delegate, they were in a House Assembly, then they go to Congress, then they become senator, and sometimes they even become president of the United States.
Wow.
So the idea of being there early on in the process, one, establishes that you actually have a real relationship, because at the end of the day, it's about relationship.
That's true.
And that's what it's really all about.
That is true. You go to church?
I do.
Praise the Lord. You
Thank
go to
you.
church?
Absolutely.
And you go to church in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital.
Yes.
Here in the United States. You've had a few people that live close to your church.
Yes, we have.
What was important about building relationships with them?
Well, you know, it was interesting. At one point, we had Leon Panetta, who was the Secretary of Defense and then became the FBI director while he was living 2 houses away from our church. And one of the things that was interesting is there would be some days where he would be coming out and Secret Service would actually have to clear the sidewalk in front of our church. And
he lived that close to the church?
Oh, yes, 2 houses away.
Oh, wow.
And when he was coming out, they would come and they would kind of petition us off. But after a while, they stopped doing that. They started getting comfortable with who we were, and we were comfortable with who he was. So he could come in and out of the building, and we would just wave like he was just another neighbor. But I think the relationship we established with them helped them to get comfortable with us.
Sure.
And we got comfortable with the idea that, yes, we have this individual that lives in our neighborhood, but it shouldn't change that much about who we really are.
Tell me about this whole thing of the need to build friends before you ask.
I think it's critical to be able to be in a position where the first time you encounter me is not because I need something from you. There are a lot of instances where when we finally show up, it's because we have a problem. And the worst question you can get is, who are you and where have you been?
Wow.
And hopefully to avoid that type of dialogue, if you find yourself to be helpful in your community and impactful in your community, then sometimes you don't even have to go ask for the favors. The people in your community will go ask for you. Because you've made such an impact and made a difference in your community. And we try to, you know, we've learned in Washington, D.C. that we had to change a lot of things because the demographics of our neighborhood changed.
Sure.
So our ministry had to change. And we find ourselves now running and having running clubs. We have now, you'll come out in front of our church and you will see a bowl for a dog to stop and get some water.
Hold that thought. Oh, boy, that's great. You're watching Ministry in Motion. Welcome back to Ministry in Motion. We're talking with Orlan Johnson about making friends before you actually need them. And Orlan, when we left, you were dealing with the benefits of a church connecting with the community. And you were talking about your church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we were talking about how all of a sudden we're in a community now that has a lot more animals. And so we decided that we would put outside of our church literally bowls for dogs to stop and drink. And what we found out is then that means their owners have to stop and look.
Yes.
And they notice our church on the corner. Sometimes we have things outside talking about our ministries. And so you end up changing your ministry based on, I believe, who your community is, because it's not so much who you think you are, but it's really more who do they say that you are. And once you find out who they say that you are, everything changes.
Wow, that is so important. You know, this whole process of making friends and moving outside of the walls of the church, it's kind of ironic that we're talking about this because members of the congregation work outside the church. They have relationships outside the church. But when it comes to connecting with the community as a body of believers, it seems like there's a lot of red tape. Do you have any thoughts for ministry leaders as to first steps? You know, you're in this community. What should a brand new pastor moving into that congregation do as first steps in this whole area?
I think one of the things, if I was a pastor going into a new community, one of the first things I'd want to find out is, who are the leaders in this community? You know, what is this community all about? I mean, sometimes just simply sitting outside your church on a weekend and just watching changes everything. In our church in D.C., one time we gave away free food, and believe it or not, we spent half the day explaining to people it really was free. We don't want anything in return. You don't have to leave an offering. And it turned out that the way they took the food was even different. It was almost like they were going grocery shopping, where they took 1 onion, 2 carrots, like they were going to fix 1 meal. But then a different community may have showed up with a truck to pick up as much as they could. And so just kind of understanding what your community is, who the leaders are, what's important to them, the schools in the community, the other churches in the community, that's an opportunity, I think, to really find out where you are and how you can be impactful.
So let's go a step further. Say I walk into a community leader's office. I introduce myself, then what?
Well, believe it or not, I think the next thing that I usually ask is, what do you need? What keeps you up at night?
Okay.
What can my congregation potentially do that may be beneficial to this community? Are you looking for a place to have activities? You know, one of the things our church started doing, which was interesting, we provide now a location for all the homeschool children in the community to get together, I believe, once or twice a month. And sometimes there are needs that are out there that you can probably take care of and don't even know that you have the gift or the resources to do so. And sometimes, you know, we have not because we ask not.
Sure.
Sometimes we know not because we ask not. And that would be my first question. You know, what do you need? What's keeping you up at night? How can I help you?
That's amazing. Learning what you don't know. I think you shared with me off camera.
Yes.
Learning what you don't know is another reason.
Absolutely.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one thing that's important, especially for pastors to understand, they are part of the fabric of a community.
Okay.
In many instances, they may have actually had a foothold in that community much longer than some of the neighbors who've actually lived there through their church.
Sure.
And so the ability to know that the community wants to know as much about you as you may want to know about the community. So now you get an opportunity to share with them because now you become a fabric of the community.
Sure.
And I think when you do that, you let everybody know it's not just what you can do for me, but it's also what I can do for you. But better yet, what can we both do for each other?
Again, it goes back to that R word you use called relationship.
Absolutely.
You know, here in the States, we have what's called a Chamber of Commerce. And I don't know if that's elsewhere outside of the U.S., but tell me a little bit about that and the benefit of churches and communities, at least here, connecting with that group.
Well, one of the things that we did in particular to North American Division, when we got our new headquarters, we decided, you know what, let's be known in this new community where we are. So we officially joined the Chamber of Commerce, which is really just a group of all the local businesses that get together to talk about issues, to talk about things that come up, how we can create a better business community. And now the North American Division is an official member of our local chamber. And our local chamber sometimes has issues that come up, and we've already been called upon from our office to come and testify on things like, you know, where do we put a sidewalk? How can this be beneficial?
Amazing.
What kind of signage may be helpful in this community and things of that nature. And the idea that they know who we are and have an idea that we want to help, that puts us in a position where we get a phone call, can you come over and help us?
Yes.
And that's exactly the position we always want to be in.
And so the relationships are reciprocal.
Absolutely.
And you're helping each other out.
We do, and so far we have housed international women's conferences. We just recently did one that you assisted us with, where we had a prayer breakfast in which we had numerous religious groups that were there, and having multiple prayers from multiple different religious groups. I think we found that to be one of the most exhilarating things that we worked on, to invite people into your own house that don't look like you, don't act like you, and may not even pray like you.
Yes.
But we found some common ground there where I think it was powerful and very, very special.
Yeah, I tell you, it's a great idea, this prayer breakfast concept. You were the brainchild, the visionary behind that. Should other communities, religious communities, practice maybe starting a prayer breakfast?
I think that would be helpful, because in my mind, you may have a lot of different things that you may not agree with, but prayer is usually one of those concepts that cut across all lines. The idea of sitting down and basically talking to your Maker and to your God, and to talk about it in a way where you can share it with your other members and other members of the faith community, I think is important. And I think when you reach out first to pull it together, you'll be shocked that you probably were the first one that did it.
What a blessing. And it was a great experience. You know, when we come back, I want to talk to you about what not to do. We've talked about the benefits, and then I want to hear from you personally.
Sure.
How God has blessed you as a lawyer in the community, and what He has done through your networking and making friends before you need them.
Absolutely.
You're watching Ministry in Motion. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Ministry in Motion. We're talking with Orlan Johnson, who is a lawyer and the Public Affairs Religious Liberty Director for the North American Division. And we're dealing with how to make friends before you need them.
Yes.
Orlan, you have benefited professionally, but also personally in this whole area of making friends, allowing God to bless that as a leverage in ministry and in work. Do you have any personal testimonies about this whole thing?
Well, absolutely. I think probably one of my first opportunities was when I was a college student at Andrews University, and I wanted to learn more about the political process. And I literally went out to meet our congressman and told him I go to Andrews and wanted to know if I could be an intern for him. And
wow, you had that mindset in college.
Yeah, and I just went out and talked with him and met his staff, and he said, we've never had an intern before. And I was like, that's why I'm here. And ended up interning for him for 3 years. And had a chance to watch the political process, 4th District of Michigan, and learned a lot about Republicans and Democrats. And at the time, my whole thing was it didn't matter what party you were, I just wanted to learn.
Sure.
And he and I remained friends after I left, and found myself kind of talking with him in D.C. from time to time. So that was kind of like my first opportunity. And any people I went to law school with, they became politicians, and I taught law school for a while, and mayors like Adrian Fenty from D.C. and Kasim Reed from Atlanta, they were my original students that I had in law school. Wow. So I just always kept in relationship and kept up with people, and what I actually do is I try to keep a tab on kind of my relationships, and what I call is warming up my relationships from time to time, where I just go through the Rolodex and send somebody a message. Hey, what's going on? How you been? Been a long time, you know?
Yeah.
Don't know what comes from it, but just want folk to know I'm thinking about them.
You know, it seems like you are very comfortable and almost seamless building relationships in the church and relationships outside of the church. And sometimes church people, quote unquote, are challenged with building relationships, especially with people who may not believe like they do, worship like they do.
Yes.
We've talked about some of the benefits. You talked about the city contacting the division office, about building a sidewalk maybe. That's because of relationships building. But what are some of the things we shouldn't do, should not do in a congregation?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to be very careful is not to use our religious experience as a stick to beat people. Sometimes we're so pleased with the things that we do that we have to be very cautious how we deal with other people.
Okay.
You know, sometimes you go someplace and you see them eating something. That's not the time to let them know that I'm a vegetarian, and that's not the time to start pounding the health message. You know, and
Right.
and you know there are other times where you just see people who do things differently from you, and you have to step back and understand that, you know what, maybe God is working in a way here that He didn't call me to be up front. You know, this whole thing about having, you know, the abilities to really interact with people well, honestly, it's a gift.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean everybody has the same gift.
Sure.
And so the idea that everyone's not good at one thing, I don't think they need to beat themselves up or we need to beat them up. But I do think that all churches should take some time to probably get into what I would call determining what your spiritual gift is. And then once you kind of get an idea what your spiritual gift is, then you can channel people in the right direction. Not all of us are supposed to be out front. Not all of us are supposed to be influencers, but there's a special job for everyone in the church.
Wow. And in building those relationships, do you think the community recognizes when a church or congregation has only selfish intentions?
Yeah.
That it's only what they can get out of the community relationship?
I think absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important that we strive to be impactful in our community in a positive way early on in the process.
Okay.
I think the quicker you can let them know that you're here and want to be helpful, the better your situation's going to be. And, you know, and we're pretty fortunate as Adventists. We're really a highly educated group. We live longer than a lot of people. So there's so many pluses that we have that we also have to be careful that we don't treat those who are the least among us worse than than we would treat anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to really understand that sometimes you can even be intimidating with your great diet and your great health care. And sometimes you have to step back and realize that I'm blessed and this individual may not be as blessed as I am, but what can I do to draw them closer to Christ?
Thank you. You know, we're living today where most people live in urban settings.
Yes.
And so that has impacted congregations in rural areas. And so in urban settings, people drive into church or they walk into church. How do you build relationships in the community when 2/3 of the congregation live outside of, particularly we're talking about urban communities, of that urban community? It makes it more difficult, I understand, but any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think one thing is you have to be more intentional with your ministry.
Okay.
The idea that you are going to just bump into somebody by accident nearby your church during the week is not happening when you have a commuter congregation. But for example, my church 4 times a year, we decide that instead of having a church service, what we'll end up doing is going out and basically engaging in what we call acts of kindness on that day. And I think that when you engage in those type of activities, it gives your commuter congregation opportunity to really be impactful where they are. And sometimes the only time they have may be on Sabbath. So I think the idea of really, we find ourselves, delivering food, we find ourselves helping people who may want to be cleaning up areas. And so in a way, you end up being a great steward for God in a different way.
Wow, that's a great concept. What would you share with pastors who have not had great relationships with their community as to how to rebuild? Some law may go down, or some variance, or some leader may have an impact on what you do. How do they rebuild that
Well, I think what I would first do
relationship?
I think what I would first do is kind of look at the idea of how has that impacted me and what can I do to potentially change that impact? I think you get a chance to rebuild relationships by what I would call just going back to the beginning, going back to basics. What do they need and what do I need? Why am I in conflict with you? Is there a way that I might be able to adjust something to assist that conflict being tapped down in some way? And I think that's where it really begins, because, I like to tell people all the time, I don't think people join my church because of the doctrines of the church so much first. I think they join the church because of the love that they feel with the people in the church.
Yes.
And I think if you can kill people with love and kindness, no matter whether or not you're in disagreement or not, it forces them to be different. And I think if we can always understand and have somebody said, I may not always agree with what that church in the corner does, but they're the most loving people I've ever met. And if I can walk away and somebody believes that, I think I've done everything that I can do in the name of Christ.
Orlan, this has been rich. Thank you so much for being on Ministry in Motion.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
We talked with Orlan Johnson about making friends before you actually need them, in regards to the congregation and the community in which that congregation lives. And he shared two benefits with us. The first benefit is that as you build relationships with the community benefits and the congregation benefits from a reciprocal relationship. The second thing he told us is congregations are actually needed by the community. Isn't that a novel idea? And with these 2 points and many others as you watch this broadcast, you will be blessed to know that you can and should make friends before you need them. Thank you for watching Ministry in Motion. For this and other programs, visit our website, www.ministryinmotion.tv. Until next time, may the Lord bless you in all you do.